Cool. So let's go hide that screen. The Ableton unlocks, if you remember, they're in the shared drive. So open up shared drive, double click, it's on your desktop, and there's a folder, it's the top of the list there, called Ableton Unlocks. And within that, it's broken into rooms. Today we're in 209. Whichever room you're in, choose the folder, and then have a look at what computer number you are. Usually there's like a little yellow sticker behind your computer monitor on the back of it somewhere. It will tell you which number it is. Sometimes they get peeled off, so you might have to find the computer with the nearest sticker and count forwards or backwards. I'm on the staff one, so if I double click that authorization file on mine, it should open up Ableton and tell me that it's successfully authorized. And if you remember, you do that for your login on that machine, and once you've done it once, it's done for you. Hopefully you should get a little sign saying you have successfully authorized. Thank you and have fun. Thank you. Sometimes, if it's the first time you've opened up Ableton, it will spend a bit of time going through its configuration, and it will also, and then it will load the demo song. If you've already been through that routine once, it will then just open up in a blank project. The other thing to do is check that you've got sound happening, and it's a very similar process in Logic. In fact, the shortcut is exactly the same. It's Command and comma. Command comma opens up the preferences. It does that in Logic as well. If you prefer to go through menus, you go Live Preferences. These are the preferences for how Ableton runs. The key one that we want to look at is in this audio side tab there, and typically we're using audio output device, so check that you've got that. If you're in a studio, it may be a booth downstairs, then the one that you choose there might be the corresponding device that you've got in the studio. There's those little Allen and Heath mix things, so it might be that. If you're at home, then of course it will be the audio interface that you use at home. So choose whichever is relevant. By default, in all the computer labs, it's built-in output. The other thing that you can do is tweak the buffer size if you want. The default on mine is 512 samples. Just a little bit about the buffer size and how it relates to us. The buffer size is like a little bit of memory, a memory buffer. It's what gets filled every time the computer wants to make a noise. It fills that little buffer with memory, and then the sound plays. The bigger the buffer, the smoother your audio output stream is, but the bigger the buffer, the slower the computer responds. And you'll hear that if you set quite a large buffer size and then play a note on the piano, there may be an actual audible delay from when you strike the piano key to when you hear the note. If you're on your machine and you're hearing, that's called latency. So if you're hearing latency, a delay from when you strike a key to when you hear the sound, what you need to do is set a smaller buffer size. The argument would be, why don't you just set the smallest buffer size possible to minimize the latency? Well, you'd be right in saying that. The problem is, depending on the power of the computer, if you have quite a large project with loads of plugins loaded, you may find that the CPU starts to get into the red. It starts to struggle. If that happens, you'll start to get audio dropouts, which might be clicks or overloads, weird digital things going on. If that happens, what you need to do is increase the buffer size, and you'll find that the CPU load goes down and the audio smooths out. So it's something that often when I'm making music, I'll set it quite small. When I've got a project that's quite big and I'm starting to mix it down, putting loads of plugins and effects and things, I'm no longer playing anything into it. I don't really need a really short latency, so in that case I'll whack it up to highest buffer size, which gives me maximum CPU power. So it's worth being aware of that little thing. Generally, starting a project, I'll put it on like 64 samples, so you get really nice responsive sound. And then once we get into a big project, we may start to see the CPU load get quite high. And if we go up to the top right hand corner of the screen, you've got a little bar there. It says 1%, 2% at the moment. That will go up to, I think it gets up to about 80%, and it starts flashing red to warn you you're nearly maxing out the computer. If that happens, you can grab more power back by increasing buffer size. See that immediately, it's gone down to 0% from where it was 2% at the smaller buffers, even though I haven't got any plugins loaded. So just a little point of reference. Let's use 64 samples for the time being. The other thing, while we're doing a little bit of configuration, is the MIDI section here, link and MIDI. I've got a Novation Launchpad here, and we've got a few of these downstairs you can book from the technicians. It's a little interface, and whilst we're doing a video screen capture, let's set this up as well. It's a USB, so I've got a USB lead. Let's plug one end into the Launchpad and then the other end into the back of the Mac. I've plugged it in and it's immediately recognised it. Don't know if you saw then, MIDI ports, it's added Launchpad S. This is classed as a control surface, so I'm going to set this up now. I'm going to choose in the first slot, we can have up to 6 control surfaces. So the first one, I'm going to click on that and go down and look for Launchpad. This is a Launchpad S. I'm just going to choose Launchpad. It doesn't have Launchpad S, but let's try that first one. The input is going to be Launchpad. Click that. And then the output is also going to be Launchpad. Click that. Immediately now, the lights have lighted up on the Launchpad, and it's now a control surface. If I close this window, what we also see is this red banding around my screen there. And what's cool is if I get an audio file, so let's have a look, samples, let's just grab some kind of sample from here, pick it up, drop it on. As soon as I've dropped it on, I've got a little light lit on that. So this is a physical representation of the grid here. And I can actually trigger that sound just by pressing the button. we'll talk more about this in a bit, but it's a really nice way of getting a physical control over Ableton. The other thing that we can do when we're in preferences is enable remote control for these Oxygen keyboards. So I'm on Oxygen 49. If I choose remote here, turn that on. So input Oxygen 49, turn on remote. What that will enable me to do is go up to the top right hand corner of my screen, click MIDI, and then choose a parameter, a knob or a fader. Let's choose the first fader there, just click once on it. Then if I just wiggle the first fader here on the keyboard, it maps it. You can see 174. If I come out of MIDI mode now, just by clicking once and move the fader, I've got a physical control over the virtual fader. So you can make use of all these different dials and faders and drum pads and things on the physical keyboards. Again, bringing all these virtual controls out into the real world is great. The problem with a mouse is that you can only do one thing at a time, but if we're in MIDI and perhaps get that one and that one, I can move all three faders all at the same time. I'm not limited to just one mouse click. So it gives you ultimate, much more control. It's really nice. So we did that by going preferences and enabling remote control on the Oxygen 49 input. What else can we do in the setup here? Well, in the File Folder tab here, there's another little button that we can enable which says Use Audio Units. Let's turn that on, because what that means is we'll be able to go to the plugins section here and we'll see all of our installed audio unit plugins. So we can see Native Instruments there, Massive, and can pick that up and drop it onto a MIDI track. And we should, if I close that, can play it from directly from the pad. Great. So that's a little overview of doing all of those setups. The audio setup, making sure you've got the right audio driver. The MIDI setup, if you're using a launch pad, you can choose that as a control surface. Also enabling remote control on Oxygen 49. And then finally, in the File Folder tab, turning on Use Audio Units to enable all of the external plugins. That will get you off to a good start. Great, I'm going to stop this video so we've got it just for the setup. Stop recording.